meditation, I took a journey spiritually. My eyes beheld a vision shone clearly in front of me. Well, in the vision I saw an old man slowly beating a drum, humming a melody that was strange to me. Then he called me and said, Sandra, come. He arose and he showed me a country, beautiful everywhere, a land of endless bounty and the riches beyond compare. There was enough for everybody, for all their material needs. But alas, when the old man showed me my people, they were all overpowered with greed. And the old man beat his drum. The old man beat his drum. He said, take this melody, girl, go to your country, warn them of the wrath to come, and if you hear him, bye-bye. Revelation time. This is revelation. This is revelation. I want them of the wrath. Gonna get want them of the wrath to come. Leaders were fighting each other. They were tearing the people apart. Friends who used to live happy together, now hatred filling their hearts. Neighbors were cursing neighbors, whole villages in mayhem. I heard they were listening deceitful leaders who were preaching for doctrine to them. Look, compassion went out of the window. Deviousness reigned instead. Morality was low, 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 but the people were spiritually dead. But the old man beat his drum. The old man beat his drum. He said, take this melody, God, go to your country, warn them of the wrath. And if you hear, warn them of the wrath. Revelation, you know what he told me? He said, go tell it on the mountain, over the hills, and everywhere. Oh, tell it on the mountain. The old man beat his drum. The youths were all in a quandary, no sense of direction. They lost all hope cause they just can't cope. They're already yet, but they're gone. They have no respect for their elders, no respect for themselves also. Their spirits were all in tatters and reading an all-time low. Then I hear them cussing the system, they're cussing the leaders too. But they were raping, stealing, shooting and looting, cause they all had nothing else to do. The old man beat his drum. The old man beat his drum. He said, take this melody, girl, go to your country, warn them of the road to come on the take this melody, girl, go to your country, warn them of the road to come and if you hear him, bye-bye. Revelation time. This is revelation. This is revelation. I want them of the road. You gonna get want them of the road to come. Leaders were fighting each other. They were tearing the people apart. Friends who used to live happy together, now hatred filling their hearts. Neighbors were cursing neighbors, Whole villages in mayhem. I heard they were listening deceitful leaders who were preaching for doctrine to them. Look, compassion went out of the window. Deviousness reigned instead. Morality was low, 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 but the people were spiritually dead. But the old man beat it wrong. The old man beat it wrong. He said, take this melody, God, go to your country, warn them of the land. And if you hear, warn them of the land. Revelation, you know what he tell me? He said, go tell it on the mountain, over the hills, and everywhere. Oh, tell it on the mountain. The old man beat his drum. The youths were all in a quandary, no sense of direction. They lost all hope cause they just can't cope. They're ready yet, but they're gone. They had no respect for their elders, no respect for themselves also. Their spirits were all in tatters and reading an all-time low. Then I hear them cussing the system, they're cussing the leaders too. But they were raping, stealing, shooting and looting, but they all had nothing else to do. The old man beat his drum. The old man beat his drum. He said, take this melody, girl, what to your country, born over the road to come on the revelation time. This is revelation. This is revelation. Want them on the road to come. He said, talk to your spiritual leaders. Tell them get on their knees and pray. To get rid of all these karmas that driving good spirits away. Then he tell me, talk to your fellow Calypsonians. Tell them stop the shame and disgrace. Encouraging people to get on and jump up and mash up the place. But behold, I saw the sunrise coming over the mountain range. The old man said, that is a symbol of hope if your people get serious and change. But the old man beat his drum. The old man beat his drum. He said, take this melody, girl, go to your country, warn them on the road. And if you do.
Oh, yes. Good evening to you. Good evening to you. And welcome to today's edition of Politics 101, the day after Easter Monday. Our apologies last night. I was feeling a little bit under the weather, and so we skipped last night. Our apologies. Coming in this evening, the song of singing Sandra Devines, one of the mothers of the Calypso art form, the modern Calypso art form. Women, of course, were not always a fixture in Calypso. one would have to go back. Lady Irie was regarded as the first real female calypsonian. She sang in the 10s. She sang in the 1950s and 1960s, and then we had Calypso Rose, who paved the way for others. Singing Francine and Calypso Rose were there, and then others such as Singing Sandra and Denise Plummer and a whole host. And we have younger calypsonians like Corinne Ashe and others. In our Guyana, one would have to go way back, Lady Diana, to get to our female calypsonians. The same thing, but today women are all over the art form. Coming in there, as I said, Singing Sandra, Revelation Time, the old man beat the drum. Revelation is one of the important planks of the Afro-Caribbean black cosmos. Revelation time. We're just coming out of the season of Easter, the crucifixion and the resurrection, and it was revealed that coming out of all the oppression, all the crucifixion, we shall rise. Christ rose on the third morn, and of course we celebrate Easter with our kite flying and festivities. The story of crucifixion is very much real for us as Black people, Caribbean people, third world people, plantation people. We are always rising, overcoming slavery, overcoming indentureship, overcoming colonialism, overcoming neocolonialism, overcoming dictatorship. We are always overcoming. It seems as though every day there is a crucifixion, but know that the Lord rose, and so the lesson for us there is that we shall overcome, as we have always overcome. Wonderful good evening to you, and I hope you had an enjoyable Easter weekend. Of course, it was a time to go to church and worship, and then Easter Monday, the time for some festivities. And I've seen pictures of people taking the time out on Easter Monday to go out and to have a wonderful time. Man shall not live by bread alone. Man shall not live by bread alone. And so therefore, there's a time and a season for everything. There's a time to worship, and there's a time to give thanks, and there is a time for merriment. And we trust that all of us did some of that for the weekend. But here we are back in the struggle, the struggle for a better Guyana, a better Caribbean, a better world for all of us. That is our dream, always been our dream from the time of humanity, from the time humanity began. But for us in Guyana and the Caribbean, from the Middle Passage, coming right through to the plantation, to the boneyards, the aspiration has always been to change that situation and to create a better world for ourselves and for our children. As we reflect on the Easter story of overcoming, we cannot help but give thanks, because we are here to tell stories that our foreparents dreamed of. We are here to witness for ourselves that the more we change, the more we rearrange. Everything seems to remain the same. But even then, we are constantly shifting goalposts. And we are constantly saying to those who hold on to power in a devious way, in an undemocratic way, to say to them that we are never going to allow the world to stay still. We are never going to allow our situation to remain the same. Wonderful good evening to all of you, and I'm glad that you all are back with us this evening as we continue to fight. We continue to struggle because we know that we shall overcome and we shall win. We shall win. We're always winning. We're always winning. It's the dialectic, you know, the dialectic. One dies as soon as one is born. You're born and you're beginning to come down, whether you're counting down to 80 years old or 90 years old. The dialectic of being alive and dying at the same time. But the world is not standing still. So even as we sometimes appear to be losing, we are still winning. We are still winning. We are alive. We are alive. And the fact that we are alive tells a whole lot. They would want to see us dead. They would want to see us buried. They would want to see us disappear. But we are here. We are here, always here to tell the story. Good evening to all of you. Good evening to Sister Cheryl Glenn, my friend, Brother Dennis Wilson, Sister Desiree Emmanuel, Brother Philip Easton. Good evening to all of you. Good evening to the entire family, Politics 101 family, a family of freedom fighters, because that's what we are. We are fighting for freedom. Good evening, Sister Donna Liverpool. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Brother Samuel James, Sister Desiree Richardson, Sister Sandra Facey. Good evening to all of you. We are because you are. I am because we are. We are in this together. We are in this together. Always know that. Always know that. When they sought to chain us to the plantation, they didn't chain us as individuals. They chained us as a group. And when we overcame, we didn't overcome as individuals. We overcame as a group. Only we can understand what it is to be an individual and at the same time to be part of a community. To be an individual and at the same time be part of a community. We are individuals, we are families, we are communities, we are a country, we are part of civilization. The Caribbean civilization, of which Guyana is an important part. It's wonderful to be a Guyanese. Sister Sandra said there, the old man beat the drum. He said, go tell it on the mountain. The times are rough, but our people must turn their faces in the right direction, Our struggle is real, but our victories are also real. It's good to be with you again on this Tuesday evening, witnessing and saying to the powers that be, we are here and we're not going anywhere. We are going to continue to be in your face. We're going to continue to stick it to you whenever we have an opportunity. One day, we shall all drink from that cup of sweetness. Bob Marley said, where is the love to be found? Where is my sweet caress to be found? It must be out there somewhere. Hope, 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 hope. We have to have hope. Our foreparents had to have had hope that one day the gates of the plantation shall be flung open and we shall rise from the plantation. And so they did. And today, as we witness attempts to push us back into the plantation, hope springs eternal, and we are here to celebrate that hope. As you know, I am not one to believe that we are only beaten. I also believe that we are beaten back even as we are beaten. The dialectics of life, and we have to understand that. And so here we are on this Tuesday evening as we peruse the landscape, the political landscape. We are still seeing the consequences of that public hearing by the United Nations Human Rights Committee. It's a very important development. And as we open the newspapers every day, we are seeing recommendations by the UN committee. United Nations Committee calls for comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation. UN Human Rights Committee says that the GCOM makeup is not democratic. It's not democratic. And in their report, the Human Rights Committee is really laying bare for the world to see and to hear what we've been crying out for the last 3 years. Our cries have not gone unanswered. Those of us who are religious people say, the Lord doesn't give us, God doesn't give us more than we can bear. God doesn't give us more than we can bear. And we are seeing the fruits of our labor to draw the world's attention to what's happening in Guyana. The world is reading about this new petrol state. The world is reading about Guyana. The world is reading about our high GDP. But the world does not always know what goes on within the borders. And those hearings there by the committee has gone a long way. I know we have mixed opinions about the role of global forces, the role of international forces. We had a program last week, and we know Brother Gerald Pereira argued very strenuously that he's skeptical about these international organizations which seek to tell us what to do, and they don't always preach what they tell us. I understand that. I'm in sympathy with that argument. But when you are a small state like ours, you need the voices of big international organizations. We need those voices as megaphones for our cause. We are part of the world. We are not big and powerful. And so we do not control the world. There are those who are big and powerful. And we know how hypocritical they can be. Yet, we need them. We need them to help to internationalize our cause. So I welcome these global forces who are prepared to highlight the sufferings of our people, who are prepared to highlight the dictatorial governance in our country. It doesn't mean that we depend on them to save us. They are about saving themselves. They are about their interests. But there are times when our interests and their interests coincide. And we must not turn away from that. I welcome every international voice, every regional voice, every hemispheric voice that brings out into the open what is happening in our country, in our country, in our country. 3 years ago, when there was regime change, when the elections of 2020 were used as the occasion to determine who governs, we on the other side, on this side, felt cheated because we felt the international forces ganged up against the leaders of our side and helped to bring a government of their choice into office. At that time, the international forces found common ground with the PPP. They found common ground with the PPP. They heard only the PPP's complaints. They heard the complaints of the other side. I always say, as you all know, that the 2020 election, there were two narratives. A PPP grounded narrative that talked about the attempt to rig an election. And then there was the other narrative, the narrative coming from the opposition side, which was in a strange twist of fate. We did not catch the PPP attempting to rig. We actually caught the PPP rigging. And so there were two narratives. And as the Americans said, the elections were disputed. When you award a disputed election to one side, that is tantamount to regime change. But thank God, it did not take them more than 3 years to figure out the real deal. That when in circumstances like those that were manifested in 2020, when circumstances like those present themselves and you award power to one side, you're actually creating a monster. The international forces, the regional forces, the local forces, they helped to create a monster in the PPP. A new monster. Some of you will argue, quite rightly, that the PPP was a monster before 2020, political monster. But what those forces did was to create this new manifestation of the monster. A runaway train. A government that doesn't care about anybody, including those who sponsored it to power. That's what happens. Under normal circumstances, governments monopolize power. In political science, we say a government could be a necessary good. It could be an unnecessary good. Government is good, but sometimes it's not a necessary good and becomes an unnecessary good. Without government, we all would be crawling over each other. There would be no rule of law. It would be the law of the jungle. What comes to do? Every man or woman for himself or herself. Government was created to mediate among our different instincts. Some say human beings, by our very nature, are selfish. And if we believe in that construct, then there must be some institution to mediate, hence government. But when government itself becomes the problem, then we have to do something about that government itself. And so the government that was created after the 2020 elections has become a rogue government. You only have to read the report from the UN Human Rights Commission, from corruption to racial discrimination to GCOM. It seems as though in every area, the government of Guyana is found wanting. It's found wanting. The UN committee calls for comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation. And they are concerned at the continued ethnic divide and tensions. This is what they said in the report. And I want to read it for you. It says the committee remains concerned about the absence of comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation that may extend beyond discrimination in employment, provide full and effective protection against all forms of discriminations provided under the UN Covenant, including direct, indirect, and multiple discrimination, and contain a list of prohibited grounds of discrimination in line with the UN Covenant. The committee is also concerned about reports of the continued ethnic divide and tensions in the state party, hate speech and incitement to racial hostility by politicians and public officials, as well as racial profiling by the police. That's deep. And you all know why it's deep. Our country is famous for denying that we have a racial problem. The government does it every day. The opposition sometimes do it. They deny that we have a racial problem. Well, here the United Nations Committee is saying that we do have a racial problem. And they highlighted something there that we have to be racial profiling by the police. This nonsense that we don't have a racial problem is the politicians who ignite race. No, we do have a racial problem. We are a country of different racial groups. And groups, by their very nature, compete with each other. Whether they are social class groups, whether they are ethnic groups, whether they are cultural groups, groups by their very nature compete for scarce resources. That is a law of humanity. We compete for resources in our families. Mommy, why you buying 2 sneakers for Jenny and only 1 for me? Human beings, by our very nature, we compete for scarce resources. And we are a country of ethnic groups. And so our competition is largely an ethnic competition for resources. Largely an ethnic competition. And each group assumes that the other group wants to discriminate against it. And so each group wants to get control of the overarching institution that is supposed to mediate conflict in the society. And that is the government. Each group believes that if it controls the government, then it cannot be discriminated against. Each group feels that way. Hence this competition for control of the government. Because if you control the government, you control the state. By state, we mean those permanent institutions, like the police, like the army, like the public service, the coercive arm of the state. If you control the government, your leader becomes the commander-in-chief. You have institutional control of the coercive arm of the state. And the coercive arm of the state is that arm of the state that gets us to do things that we would not normally do. When the police arrest you, or the police tell you, you cannot congregate here, the police is acting with the power of the state, the institutional and legal power of the state. Now, if I tell you, you can't stand up there, I'm not in control of the state. You don't have to obey me. But when the police tell you can't stand up there, you are bound to obey the police, because the police is speaking to you with the legal protection of the state. So each group wants to control the government, so they control the state. The government also has the power to distribute resources, whether it's water, whether it's the common treasury. These are all common resources of the state. The air that our airplanes fly in, the water, the roads, the money in the treasury. These are common resources. The government, when elected, gets the power to distribute those resources. Enormous power. So when an ethnic party wins an election, it assumes this enormous power over the citizens, the power to distribute resources. And those resources, like I said, can be common resources, but it can be employment. It can be contracts. So the power to distribute resources, the power to control the society through the state, the police, the army. The government has enormous power. And in our ethnic society, where ethnic parties contest elections and win elections or lose elections, it means that when that ethnic party assumes power, it assumes power in the name of one ethnic group. And the logic is that it then proceeds to manage the state in the interest of one ethnic group. When you hear the PPP leaders say, we are carrying out our manifesto, that is the manifesto of the PPP. Each party has its own manifesto. When a party wins, that party is carrying out its manifesto. There is no national manifesto. To have a national manifesto, you'll have to bring together the manifesto of the PPP, the coalition, and all the parties, and then put them together, and then you'll have a national manifesto. The PPP is governing based on the PPP's manifesto. And the PPP's manifesto is the creature of its interests. Its ideological interests, but most importantly, its ethnic interests. And there are ethnic interests. So the government that we have is governing based on the interests of its ethnic origins and its ethnic community. It means that the ethnic group that is outside of government does not get to wield the power, does not get to exercise power, institutional power, does not. And there is no ethnic government on the face of the earth that governs in the interests of all ethnic groups. None, 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 none. As we speak today, as we speak now, there are over 200 ethnic conflicts in the world. 200 ethnic conflicts in the world, active ethnic conflicts. We know of the big ones, like the one going on in the Middle East, or the one between the Russians and the Ukrainians. They're all ethnic conflicts. But there are other ethnic conflicts that are active, that are going on, including in Guyana. The conflict between the police, between the teachers and the government. Yes, it's between teachers and the government. But the teachers are mostly, 75% of the teachers are mostly of one ethnic group. And the government, more than 75% of the makeup of the government is of one ethnic group. It's an ethnic conflict. We can call it by honor. It's a trade union conflict. It's a conflict between workers and employers. But what's the ethnic makeup of the workers? What's the ethnic makeup of the employers? In a place like Guyana, that matters. And so the ethnic divide is real, and we do ourselves tremendous harm by denying that there's an ethnic problem. I hear good, well-meaning people, including some of our opposition leaders, who say, well, you know, we don't have a racial problem, you know, because everybody's suffering. Well, everybody's suffering doesn't mean that there is not a racial problem. All it means is that each racial group is suffering. And each group Each group sees its suffering, perceives its suffering differently. Some of you may remember Brother Kadaki went into Strathspey, which is an Indian community next to Buxton. They were picketing the bad roads and I think water. And Kadaki went in there. And when he got there, they took down their placards. And they told him, are we government going to come and fix our story? It means that, yes, they're suffering bad roads like the people in Buxton or the people in Bachelor's Adventure. Yes, they suffer, but their perception of their suffering is different. And we do ourselves a great harm by not recognizing that the ethnic group that supports the opposition is at a disadvantage institutionally, because it is not represented in the institutions of power. Yes, Africans make up the army and the police. Most police and army people are Africans. But the leadership of the police, the leadership of the army, do not reflect, as we have seen now, the makeup of the group, and do not reflect the thinking. Brother Paul Slow revealed to us that, I think there are 10 command districts. 6 of them are led by Indo-Guyanese. And that's 60%. And Indo-Guyanese make up less than 10% of the police. Yet in the leadership, they make up 60%. So ethnicity is real. Race is real. And I'm using them interchangeably, although they're really different. Ethnicity is more a cultural construct, but our ethnicity in Guyana is played out as if race is race. Race is a political construct. And that is why we in Guyana use the term race more than ethnicity. Because while ethnicity is cultural, we play out our cultural differences in a political way. Africans and Indians operate as though they are historical enemies. They never enslave each other. Well, to some extent. If we think about the Eastern slave trade, there were Africans who were enslaved by Asians, including what is today India. That's a different story. Well, not a different story. I don't want to bring it here and to color the discussion, but that's a fact. That's a fact. But African Guyanese and Indian Guyanese are not necessarily historical enemies. But we carry out our relations as though we are historical enemies. And that has to do with the way in which we came to this Guyana and the Caribbean. And it has to do with our competition for resources. So when you hear the UN committee saying it in clear terms, the committee is also concerned about reports of the continued ethnic divide and tensions in the state party. The state party is the governing party. The hate speech and incitement to racial hostility by politicians and public officials, as well as racial profiling by the police. This is not David Hines saying that. That is the UN committee. And they're saying that is inconsistent with the UN covenant. I always get agitated when people who should know better in Guyana, some of the newspapers, some of the middle class, black people and Indian people, always say, where's the evidence that there's racial discrimination? What damn evidence? Racial discrimination is in your face. First of all, it's institutional, because the institutions themselves are geared towards discrimination. The Guyana police force was formed in 1839. Before 1839, there was no police force. There was no need for a police force because it was during slavery. The slave master police his slaves or her slaves. But as soon as African people walked out of the plantation, the state said, bam, bam, there is need for a police. Because these people are assumed to be criminals. And we have to police them. So the police force itself was born in an anti-black, anti-African environment. And we have not had any serious reform. So you still find more than 180 years after the police force was formed, there is still racial profiling against black people. Because the police force itself was born, was created to police and to profile black people. So even though the police force is predominantly black, the ideology of the police force is anti-black. And we haven't reformed that. You look at policemen, not only in Guyana, all over the world. They go into a black community and their whole demeanor changes. They go into another ethnic community and their demeanor changes. The assumption by the police that if you go into we see police, Indian people pelt down police, beat them, and police running with gun in their waist. It will never happen in an African community. If African people only raise their hand to the police, they pull the gun out of the waist. But when they go into an Indian community, they act different. Which means the institutions themselves are anti-black. So when you're telling me give the evidence, what evidence are you asking for? Thank God, the United Nations Committee has struck down that myth. That myth that you know there's no discrimination because we can't provide data. No, data is important. I'm not saying there's no need for data. We have to have data. But often the collection of data lies with the government. The government has the data. Are you asking me that I must provide data? The government knows. The government knows the data because the government collects data. It's the government we ought to ask for the data. You know, I was on a GoPlan program the other night. It's a good program, but I had to combat this nonsense that, okay, East Indian people came to Guyana to make money. That is true. They came as indentured servants, so they came here to make money. Remember Orphanalis, all of the groups came here for betterment. We're total ignorance, but at least the people who I was on are not that ignorant or are not ignorant. So they said very plainly, Indian people came here to make money. Black people did not come here to make money. Black people came against their will. Now, the argument that is then made is because Indian people come to make money, they have evolved a skill of making money. And because black people didn't come to make money, black people have not developed the skill of making money. Hence, the nonsense that Indian people can do business and black people can't do business. And I had to combat that foolishness. All human beings, all groups do business. You go in Africa, you go in Haiti, predominantly black communities, and you see people doing business every day. Just as you go in our black villages, people do business. Indian people do business differently from black people, but we all do business. I grew up in a village seeing the ladies turning over, as they said, turning over, buying and selling. I grew up in a household in which my aunt bought and sold things. Today, two of my siblings are business people. And you were watching me and tell me that black people can't do business? No, black people do business differently. Yes, Indians came to make money, and that urge to make money meant that they do business in a certain way. I'm not going to describe it. Black people didn't come to make money. Black people were enslaved. But when they came out of slavery, they had a motivation to make money. And they decided the way to make money was to do it in a collective way. That is why they took their money, they bought lands, and they invested in what we now call villages. The greatest entrepreneurial initiative in the history of Guyana. Yet you're saying that black people can't do business. No, they do it differently. But black people's business approach is more a communal approach. The Indian business approach tends to be more individual, individualistic. But they do business, or both groups do business. So this nonsense that one group. Now, if you say one group does business and the other group can't do business, then the policy of the government as regards developing businesses would be prejudice towards the group that can do business. So you will invest government resources in the group that is said to know about business. And the group that you think don't know about business, you don't expend resources among them to develop businesses. And that is the reality in Guyana. That black people do not own big businesses has to do with the fact that the government and the state never expended the resources to develop their small businesses into big businesses. Hence, there's no big business network among Africans. But just like Indians, Africans have small businesses, a plethora of small business. Where Indian people have the edge is that Indian people were given opportunities by the state to develop big business, just as the Portuguese and the Chinese were given the resources during the 19th century by the colonial state to develop big business. And when black people started their business, the state suppressed their business. There's no special thing in the Indian brain that makes them better business people than Africans. What is a better business person? If you are selling something that nobody else selling, your thing gonna sell out. You don't gotta go to business school to figure that out. If you have the monopoly on the market, you are going to get better returns. You don't have to get a special brain thing in your brain for that. I'm saying that these ethnic myths find their way into policies. You hear what Mr. Jack always say? public servants don't produce nothing. They don't produce nothing. What is production? Most of our business people in Guyana do not make things. We are what you call mercantile business people, capitalists. We buy and sell. You buy a car from America for $500,000, you bring it and you sell it for $2 million. And you make your money. That's all our business people. We do not produce cars. We do not produce computers. We buy and sell car. We buy and sell computer. We are mercantile capitalists. It doesn't take too much brain to do that. To go to America and buy something for $10 and come and sell it for $25. Once you have the resources, you're able to do it. So, when Jack Dio talked that public servants don't produce anything, we don't produce anything. Cane cutters don't produce sugar. Cane cutters cut the cane. That then the sugar is produced from the cane, but cane cutters cut the cane. And when the cane cutter gets sick, get caught by the yarn, and he go to the clinic, is an African nurse got looking after. So we are all part of this so-called production line. That business person, that Indian businessman, who taught him in school? Who's teaching his children? For the most part, it's African teachers. We are all part of this assembly line that we call development. So this nonsense that Jack Dio peddles, that you can't pay public servants better because they don't produce nothing. They produce the minds of the so-called people who you say produce things. So, you see, what the United Nations is talking about is real. There is ethnic discrimination. What Jack Dio is espousing there is a discriminatory practice in terms of wages. He's saying one group called the public servants do not deserve as much wages as other groups because they do not produce anything tangible. And those public servants are mainly of a particular ethnic group. So what starts out as probably an ideological thing then has ethnic repercussions. You know, when we talk about business, you all remember the 1980s when our economy started to tank? Mainly black women took to the airwaves with their suitcases, and they developed an entrepreneurial class that we call traders. People now go to what they know, I don't know what they call it now, cheap street or whatever they call it, those big things there to big market, and they take it for granted. Those things were created by black women not so long ago. And these are the people you're saying can't do business, who built up an institution that saved the country from starvation. The state never invested in them. The state never moved them from trading with suitcases to trading with containers. At the state, been interested in developing the African entrepreneurship framework, the African entrepreneurial landscape, they would have invested in those traders. Because that's what the PPP did. The PPP came to power. It took small businessmen, a man with one sand truck. They give him contracts, sometimes contracts on what we call on credit. And that man or those men were able to grow their business from one sand truck to now they get 100 sand trucks. The government helped them in a way that the government never helped our small business, African small business people. So these myths, that is why my party is saying, if we get close to power, and we want to get close to power, we want to get into power, we are not going to necessarily be able to do it by ourselves, but in coalition with others. We are saying take 10% of the oil resources and distribute them equally to all households. 6 years ago, Professor Thomas calculated at around $5,000 US, which is $1 million Guyana dollar. Today, given the amount of oil that we have found since then, that will go up. We don't know how much it will. Professor Thomas is doing the calculations right now. But if the lady that is selling plantain chip, and she's selling 200 packs of plantain chip per day, and when she get her $1 million, she decides that she is going to up her plantain chip by buying the equipment so she can mass produce plantain chips, where she's now don't have to just go and sell at the corner. She's now distributing plantain chips because she's able to develop the business infrastructure because the state helps her. That is what my party wants to do. That is, no group anywhere in the world has developed the entrepreneurial know-how without help from the government. None. No group. That is what the government is there for. Some of you always say, well, government, people mustn't depend on the government. What the hell are we going to depend on? Why we create a government? For? It's to depend on it. The government is there to do things that we cannot do for ourselves. I don't want the government to bathe me. You don't want the government to bathe you. You don't want the government to think for you. What you want the government is to create the damn schools with good teachers, better paid teachers, so that you can learn better. The government is not learning for you. You learn for yourself. But the government creates the institutions so you can learn better. Governments are there to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Don't let people give you all that nonsense that you mustn't depend on government. The people who tell you mustn't depend on government, they're the ones who depend on government the most. So we want an attitude change. We want an attitude change. And I'm glad that the United Nations has recognized that we do have an ethnic problem. We do have problems of ethnic profiling by the police. We do have a problem of ethnic maldistribution of resources. We do have a problem with ethnic control of government. And we have to correct it. That's what the United Nations is saying. But first of all, We have to recognize the problem. And sometimes we black people listen to other people chat nonsense and we repeat the nonsense. And we can't do business, black man can't do business. It's not true. As I said, the black approach to business tends to be more communal. The Indian approach tends to be more individualistic. It doesn't mean that they're not individualistic business people in the black community, or they're not communal business people in the Indian community. But by and large, the attitude to business is different. It is not that one group do business and one group don't do business. I hear people talk nonsense about, Indian people selling milk and they don't drink milk. They will sell all the milk and black people will drink all the milk and they drink all the profit. All those kind of nonsense. We are different people. The minute you begin to say one can do this better than the other, you're moving into the realm of ethnic superiority. And I am dead against ethnic superiority. I am for ethnic equality, ethnic justice, not ethnic superiority. I don't want black supremacy as much as I don't want Indian supremacy. What we want is for all ethnic groups to have an equal opportunity. To have equal opportunity. But for there to be equal opportunity, you have to have an equality of condition. Because if your condition is better than my condition, and we give you the equal resources, you are already in front of me. So we have to make the conditions equitable first. And then equality of opportunity then makes sense. So sisters and brothers, we must be glad what the United Nations has done in making our issues global, bringing them to the global hearing and giving it a kind of global legitimacy. We have to do the work ourselves. We have to do the work ourselves. The government has been caught. The government felt that it was invincible. Nobody could tell it what to do. And it was good to see Sister Gail sweating, confused. It's good because it shows that they're not invincible. They're not invincible. And we have to continue that struggle. We have to continue to do what we do. And I want to urge an attitude change on the part of our supporters. Believe what you see, with or without data. And if you believe it, then you will be motivated to change it. We do have an ethnic problem. We are crucified. And like Christ did, we have to rise from the ashes of the crucifixion. We too must have our Easter morning, our resurrection. And it's not going to come in one click of the finger. It will take continuous work, continuous struggle. The United Nations said that GCOM is not democratic. If GCOM is not democratic, how can GCOM deliver democratic elections? That's our question for another day. Another day. If GCOM is itself not a democratic institution, how can GCOM produce democratic elections? That's the big question. And we have to sort it through. And we have to answer it. Time has flown. And it happens like that when we get into deep conversations. But we've got to go because we have to make way for other shows. I know Sherrod has started already. And so we've got to go. And we come back tomorrow to continue the discussion. I want to, as usual, thank all of you for coming on. And I noticed there is animated conversation going on. And I'm glad about that, because we've got to engage in this concourse of ideas, just this concourse of ideas. I'll be on Mark Benchop in half an hour or so, and then tomorrow morning I'll be on Kidaki. So it's a busy 12 hours or so. So for those of you who join in Mark later, I'll see you there. I think I'll be on with Wayne Caesar. I noticed Wayne on here, and so Wayne and I will see you all in a few on the Straight Up Mark Benchop show. Thank you all.